Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm so delighted to be here today with author C.B. Bernard. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Erin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, a little bit about C.B. Bernard. C.B. Bernard is the author of Chasing Alaska, a portrait of the last frontier then and now, which was a Publishers Weekly and National Geographic top pick and a finalist for the Oregon Book Award in nonfiction. His fiction and essays have appeared in Catapult, Gray's Sporting Journal, and elsewhere. I'm so delighted because we are going to talk today about his first novel, Small Animals Caught in Traps, this fantastic book I have in my hands. So let's start with that. Please tell me about Small Animals Caught in Traps.
Thanks, Erin. I appreciate it. I'm going to start off by saying the title is mostly metaphorical. It's not literally about animals being caught in traps, although when my mother heard the title, that was her fear. She said, "Aren't you worried people are going to think it's a how-to manual for catching vermin?" And I wasn't until that moment. It's the title is a metaphor for what? For the human condition, right? For relationships, for careers, for the pressures we put on ourselves and each other. And I think that is probably a good way for me to describe the book. It follows a man named Lewis Yaw, who is a heavyweight boxer who flees his life of violence in New England, moves out to a town called Disappointment, Oregon, to become a fly fishing guide and to have a family. And it's about him. It shows him trying to raise his daughter and to help her find her way in the world, even as he loses his own. That's not really what it's about. That's just what happens in the book, right? It's about drowning. Lewis Yaw is very much a man drowning. I think people drown the way Hemingway said they go broke, gradually and then suddenly. And I think that's what's happening to him throughout this book. And it's really about how the people who love him most try so hard to save him from drowning. Of course, the danger of trying to save somebody from drowning is they pull you down with them, and you have to decide whether to cut your losses and let go or keep fighting.
Yeah, fascinating. And, the joy of mothers, right? They always have something to say about the things we create. I do feel like that title, though, Small Animals Caught in Traps, as a metaphor, is just so powerful because, I, for one, can think of many moments when I have felt cornered or trapped and overwhelmed and just really small. And I think alongside, kind of that metaphor of drowning, there's a lot there and a lot to relate to. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for exploring that piece.
I will say that one animal does literally get caught in a trap in the book in the first sentence on the first page, but that's just to establish the metaphor. The original title, the working title was Disappointment, Oregon, which is the name of the town where it takes place. But early in the process, an editor who read a draft said that title is a little too depressing. You should change it to something more upbeat. So I went with Small Animals Caught in Traps, which should tell you something about me.
Understood. And a little bit about the book too, right? Yeah.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
I think what's so powerful about this book, and you started to talk about this a little bit in your overview, is it does explore things that you don't often see in literary fiction. Like there's boxing and fishing and hunting. So what drew you to write about some of these pieces that don't often come up in literary fiction? And how did it feel to thread them through the story?
The short answer is those are the things that I love and that I know about, and it makes sense to write about. A slightly longer answer is that, again, they're all great metaphors for what the characters are going through in this book. The very long answer is that there are literary fiction novels about those things. They're just harder to find, maybe. They used to be more common, but I have shelves behind me of books set in the wilderness and books about fighters and books about hunting and fishing that aren't really about hunting and fishing or the wilderness. Again, where they're set, where their characters live, is very different from what they're about. But those are the places that I like to be, and I think it made sense for me to include them. There's also an element. Ron Carlson wrote this great book called The Signal a few years ago. And there was a review that said, if men can't be brought back to fiction by books as fine as this, then it's their own damn fault. And I love that. And I kind of took that as a challenge. I wanted to write a book that some of the men I know who don't read fiction could read and could enjoy. And I don't mean that to say that literary fiction set in cities or academia or urban settings can't appeal to people who love to be outdoors. They can, but you need to kind of pave the way, grease the skids, right, to make it more accessible for people. So I found that spending as much time outdoors as I do, and with fishing guides and with hunters and things like that, a lot of them don't read. And I thought maybe if I wrote a book that they could see themselves in, it might appeal to them. But this isn't just a book for men. This is a book for all sorts of different people. I think there are a lot of different entry points for people. But again, the real short answer, why did I set it there? How is it set there? It's because that's what I know best. That's where I like to be. And the wilderness is such a great place to find yourself in. So what a great place to put characters in and see what they do there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And as someone who is married to a person who does get out into the backcountry, who does hunt, who does fish, I will definitely be, kind of making sure to like get this book in his hands, have him check it out. Because I do think I have heard that there are long nights, when it's like it gets dark kind of early and you're hanging out in the tent, and, like you're willing to bring a book in. So, kind
Yeah.
of both for the people who do hunt and fish and get out into the backcountry and for the people who love them and maybe watch them go, like this is a great book for everybody. So thank you for kind of sharing that thing that that you love. And you talked a little bit about the characters, and I kind of want to go there next to talk about Lewis Yaw, one of the main characters of the book, and his daughter Grayling. And so this is a really central relationship, this father-daughter relationship. And so I would just love to hear from you, like, how did it feel to write this relationship, and what did you learn from your characters?
I think it's a really good question. One of the central themes in the book for me is how our past shapes us, right? Does our past decide who we become or just inform it? Can we become the person we want to be in spite of how we were raised or the things that happened to us in our life? So I mentioned Lewis is a man drowning. He's really a man fleeing his own past. He was raised by an abusive, violent father in a rough household, and for much of his life, all he knew was that kind of violence and really disappointment. And when he has a daughter, he really wants to be a better father than the one that he had, and he wants to be the kind of father he wished he had. And it's not easy because you get a limited toolbox, right? You're raised a certain way. Your own parents model certain things for you, and it's hard to get past that. So I'm going to keep talking about metaphors here, which seems like hopelessly cliche when we're talking about novels, but he's a fishing guide, a fly fishing guide on the Terrebonne River. And I think of that river, which runs through Central Oregon. It's imaginary, but in this book, it runs through Oregon and into the canyons that it has carved out over centuries. Rivers can do that. Rivers can really reshape the land over time, and you can change the course of a river, but it's not easy. I mean, you can dam it. It takes work, but you can change the course of a river. For me, that is kind of how I think about this relationship. As he tries to raise his daughter, he's trying to dam the river of his past. He's trying to reshape who he is and not fall prey to the same things that his father did, and not be kind of cursed to hand on this legacy of disappointment and depression and violence that he grew up with. And I think I learned a lot about how hard that can be, even in my own experience, in my own life. I had great parents. I grew up in a great household, but there are still, the old expression, I opened my mouth and my mother flew out. I think that you are kind of, in some ways, a product of how you were raised, and you either become that way or you become something slightly in reaction to that, which is not always a condemnation of how you were raised, but it's really just how we become adults, how we become our own people. So I think I learned a lot about that process and how challenging that can be by writing about this. And it doesn't always work out for people. Sometimes you can't get past some things. And I think I learned some sympathy for people about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, there's so much to be said too about trauma and generational trauma, and that, kind of trauma when it's not healed is transferred, right? And so what does it mean to sort of like look at your own challenging pieces saying, I don't want to pass that on. And so what healing do I need to do? What growth do I need to do? What really hard work do I need to do if I'm not going to do that, right? Which, yeah,
Yeah.
is a really hard path. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
early in the book, there's a scene very early in the book where they're in the delivery room, and Lewis, who has finally come around in his mind to having a child, uh, for some reason he just assumed it would be a son, and that he would have this kind of fishing buddy and hunting buddy and sparring partner, and somebody he could raise the way that he wished he'd been raised. And it's a shock to him that he has a daughter. And uh, I love that one of the nurses says to him, raise her the same way you would raise a son. She'll do all the same things. She'll just be better at them. And that's like such a revelation for him. I wish it wasn't, but it's such a revelation for him. And it was fun for me to kind of play with that a little bit throughout the book, and have it be a daughter that's teaching him as much about the world as he is teaching her. And, they're learning new things from each other, which I just think is such a great thing.
Yeah. And as a reader, it's a powerful relationship to watch unfold, right? Like as you see her grow up, as you see him kind of change and evolve and learn from her, and that symbiosis back and forth is incredibly powerful.
I
Um,
appreciate that. The way legacy
yeah.
passes from family is, everybody's got their own, and sometimes it's a good legacy, sometimes it's a bad legacy, but we all struggle with it, and we all celebrate it in different ways.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Which actually kind of leads into my last question, which is that this is your first novel after a book of nonfiction. And so, how does it feel different to have a novel coming into the world? And what are you hoping for alongside its release?
Yeah, I think no, I always wanted to be a novelist. The great surprise to me was that the first book I had come out was nonfiction, and that was more or less a fluke in the process. And by fluke, I mean the first novel I wrote didn't sell. Uh, but it, I think I approach nonfiction writing similarly to how I approach fiction writing. My nonfiction book, Chasing Alaska, is a kind of creative nonfiction more than, I mean, it's not academic. It's certainly not academic. I think it very much follows characters and arcs and things like that, much the same way that you do in fiction. I think both are just different ways of seeing the world and explaining the world. We turn to books to explain the world, also to escape it. And I think uh, sometimes the trap might be that you think of nonfiction as a way to explain the world and fiction as a way to escape it. But that's not true. I think you can learn just as much about the world from reading fiction, and you can escape the world by reading about history and learning about different things. Uh, so for me, the great surprise, I think, was not distinguishing as much between them. I really enjoyed writing nonfiction. My heart is still as a fiction writer, I think. And my next book, which comes out next April, Ordinary Bear, is also a novel. We'll see if I go back to nonfiction after this, but my hope is that it connects with somebody the way that all the books that connected with me as a kid did. I hope it finds a reader that appreciates it as much as I appreciated the books that made me want to become a writer and a reader.
Yeah, yeah. And with that, readers, please do get your hands on a copy of Small Animals Caught in Traps. Yes, read it in the backcountry, read it from the comfort of your couch, read it wherever, and please do check it out. And C.B. Bernard, thank you. Thank you so much for writing this incredible book and for taking the time to speak with me about it today. I'm so grateful.
Erin, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for all you do for writers and readers. Your podcast is great. So are you. Thank you.